Good morning, Glenn.
Good morning.
Welcome, everyone. This is DaCosta with Xencelabs, and we have Glen Southern here joining us from the UK. Super early for us, but the perfect time for him, and he's going to walk us through his ZBrush mastery.
Are we ready to go live right now?
Oh, we're live right now, my friend.
Okay, fantastic. So I don't know what the demographic is in terms of where everybody is, but I'm guessing that a good percent are in America, or Canada. So obviously it's incredibly early to be watching a demo of an English guy making ZBrush creatures. So thanks very much, anyone who's here doing that. So my name's Glenn. I run a small company in the UK called Southern GFX, and I have done for let me think now, must be 10 or 12 years in the current guise that it is, including through COVID. And what my company does is we got up to a team of 6, and I still keep a lot of freelancers on top of that. And what we basically do is make digital assets, whether it be for game, film, TV, more recently, a lot more VR, and a lot more experiential stuff for AR and any need really. Less game than anything, more TV and film. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk through a little bit. We've only got 45 minutes, so I'm going to talk through a little bit about my time with ZBrush. And I'm now a 21-year veteran with ZBrush, which I find incredible when I even say that out loud. So some people have said to me recently that, ZBrush is a fairly new phenomenon, but when you've been using it for 21 years, it just feels like your life really. It's what's made my career what it is. Everything I do really passes through ZBrush. And obviously I'm here today with Xencelabs who make hardware that facilitates me doing that. So some of the stuff that I'm going to talk through, I'm going to talk through a few pictures. I'm going to talk through some workflow. I'm going to talk through like how I kind of came to my workflow and the kind of work that I do. So it's very much more about ZBrush. So I'm going to put ZBrush on screen a lot of the time. So the first 10 minutes, I'm just going to flash through some images just to talk through a little bit about how I got to the processes that I do. And it's good that we're in Lightbox, because one of the most influential people for me as a creature designer was Whitlock, who runs a course on Schoolism, all about creature design. And before I even go any further, let me just say that I recommend that course as probably the best course I've ever taken. It changed the way I think about creature design. So, and there was no ZBrush in that whatsoever. It was literally about the core. It was pen and paper or on a tablet. And it was about a process of how we design creatures and how we look at creatures differently as we're designing them. So the ZBrush part, I always say this, I teach ZBrush and have done for the longest time. And I always say that the button pressing and the ability to know where everything is in ZBrush is secondary to your anatomy skills. So anyone who's new at this, anyone who's an illustrator, anyone who's coming through and starting that journey from 2D to 3D, people say that ZBrush is incredibly hard to learn, and it is different than anything else I've ever taught. But I also think once you get past a very certain, like a level, you fly with it. Once you've got past that initial hurdle about the interface and how it's not a standard interface. Now, what I'm going to talk through is this is my interface on screen, and I use this for everything. It's not the standard ZBrush interface, and it's got everything on it that I need to do 95% of what I do. And I'll explain some of that in about 20 minutes time when I start talking about how I would get from that, from a sphere to a triceratops, or in this case, what's called a Machairoceratops. So let me just whip through some images, and I'll just start talking to you about what I'm all about. So by all means, please put questions in the comments. DaCosta's quite happy to give me questions as we go along. So there's no specific flow that you can interrupt as I talk. So please feel free to ask me anything.
Yes, I'm here to help harass Glenn as much as possible.
Which is quite normal. So I spend a lot of my time doing creatures. So I'm a digital sculptor by trade. My company makes digital creatures. We get commissioned to make all kinds of things. So I'll hold a couple of things up that I've got that are, what you've seen already is like dinosaurs. We're focusing on dinosaurs because it was the last big kind of set of creatures I ended up doing. So these are all output on a 3D printer, and it doesn't actually matter what you're going to do with these. It's all about how they're made, and are you anatomically correct in the way that you make them. So are you making them so they work in a realistic way? And that's what Terrell's course was all about, is something called I can't even say it, anthropomorphism, where we overlay a human characteristic on an animal and a creature. That's all well and good, and we have to do that a lot, but we have to make it read well as a character. So there's no point in just making something stand on its back legs like a human if you don't understand what that anatomy would do. So if you've got to make a lion stand up on its back legs, it would look odd if you don't understand what's going on with the muscles. And a good creature designer would think about all of that in the very, very early stages. So I'm going to whip through some of these images. So that's an output of the thing I've just put in my hands there. So this kind of stuff I'm showing you here is some of the commercial work I've done in the last couple of years. So I work on Netflix shows and some films that you might know. Worked on the opening of Jurassic World, where I'd sculpt a lot of rock formations and then eventually the logo. This is something that's quite interesting. So this is from a Netflix show called Shadow and Bone, and I was early concept artist on that show. So these are VR sculptures. So I sometimes do a lot of my initial forms in VR, and I'm a very, very active VR sculptor in quite a few different programs. And I like the fact that now we're going towards sculpting both on a desktop and in VR, and we can switch our headsets on and off. So if you look at programs that are, Adobe have got something along that lines that's coming out soon. You've got Codon that's been doing it for a while, and you've got another one called Xencelabs that I'm going to do a lot of work with this year, and that hopefully will get to that level where we can literally be working on our block out, or primary forms we call it, and then we would switch back into from the desktop depending on when we need it, and then go to programs like ZBrush and Blender and Maya depending on what the workflow is. But what you're seeing on screen there, it's not ZBrush. This is all just bashed out in a program called Adobe Medium. It used to be Oculus Medium, and this was less than a day's work. So this entire bashed out set took well less than a day, actually. And the reason we do that kind of thing is because we're looking for shapes. If you zoomed in on any of these, I'd be quite embarrassed to show you it more zoomed in than this, but it's just about shapes and forms, and have we got the legs right? Have we got the, do we want veins or fins on it? And that, I used to do this mostly in ZBrush. This used to be where I spent most of my creative time, or pen and pencil, or on a tablet. But with VR and the tablet and the whole mix and mash of different ways of doing it, you kind of find a new way of doing things. So generally now I block out in VR, I take it straight to ZBrush, and then I just use a good old fashioned pen. And, in this case, we're using the Xencelabs, like a standard tablet. And I sculpt that shape up to what I need it to be, really. And if it's for a commercial job, then that will be, lots of variants for the director or the art director or whoever it is that wants it from me. And then if it's for game, then it would be a different path, and then all the technical stuff starts. So then we start talking about UVs and all of that stuff. And I generally don't worry so much about that. We do have to do that. We've just built Kabul Airport, for example, for a news feature where, so we had to build several thousand buildings. And obviously I'm a creature and character, designer by trade, but my company, we have to make the oddest things. So because of what was going on with Kabul, they needed a full airport. So we would do that kind of work, but you have to know how to do the technical stuff. So the UVing, how to get a texture onto that quickly, how to project, all that kind of stuff.
These are amazing, Glenn. Can I interrupt you with a question?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah.
Yeah. So Anna Kodorenko, I believe her last name is, is asking, what are the biggest kind of professional challenges related to creatures that you face? You touched about anatomical accuracy.
Yeah, so the biggest challenge is one thing that isn't a challenge for me anymore is anatomy, because I've spent probably about 10 years really trying to refine. So that used to be my biggest challenge. If you're coming to this new, the biggest challenge will be getting anatomy nailed down, and you have to find a way to understand first the skeleton on every mammal. So the way I recommend doing it is because I've learned from people like Scott Eaton and from Terrell and from um, Steve Lord. These names are names you should write down if you don't know them. And the way that I always recommend it is learn this human skeleton, because obviously humans are mammal. Once you've learned the human skeleton, learn human muscles. And that gives you, and you do what's called insertion and origin, nail that to a tree, make that your main thing. Even if you're going to do dinosaurs, I would say that's a great path. If you can nail that down, then you've got a saleable skill straight away. And then you can learn ZBrush or whatever. You might go into concept, you might go into animation. But if you know how the bones work and how the muscles attach and each end, so the insertion and the origin of every major muscle group, that will give you a huge advantage. And then from there, then you can diversify and you can understand whether you want to learn, or go and learn quadruped, biped. What's the difference in plantigrade and dischidigrade? So that bit where you come up off your toes like a werewolf or like a dog, or you see how I say werewolf first, so I'll go straight to fantasy reference rather than dog. And then once you've learned that, you can branch out and learn some of the easier stuff. So then you can learn things like insects. Birds are even though obviously they're not mammals, they've still got an anatomy that conforms to that ideal. So a bird's wing is an arm, and it's just a different set of muscles. And and then you can learn the complexities of things like a dog doesn't have a collarbone, and why can't a horse turn its leg and touch its teeth? That's called pronation and supination. You learn all of this kind of stuff. That's the battle. Learning ZBrush and learning to sculpt in Blender or whatever is not the battle. That all comes. And what I'm showing you on screen is just like a mix and a mash of all the things I might make in it. This is all this year's stuff. And I think, are we giving these alphas away, DaCosta? Are these part of?
Yeah. This is part of the goodie bag, so you'll be able to get if people have.
So I use an iPad a lot, because ZBrush is my main sculpting tool, but I use something called Nomad Sculpt a lot, which is I go back and forth when I'm traveling, and I've always got the iPad with me as well. And it's a great complement. And all of these alphas came through that kind of process. And then I just use them in ZBrush because I make hundreds of them. So if I'm making dinosaurs, I just happen to be making a lot of dinosaurs this year, and a pack of scales and alphas is something that helps me. But the point I was about to make is, doing the nice scales and the surface detail is the last thing you need to worry about. You must pin down that anatomy. That was the point I was trying to make. So does that answer it, DaCosta?
Yeah. I think that definitely answers it. So I got another question. Is talking about asking from John Luce. Are you not John Luce? Sorry, Morgan Rossi. Do you have recommended resources for learning anatomy? Are there any of your favorite books?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I don't know whether you can
see
online. Yeah, there's like 45 feet of books there I could recommend for you. So I like, for anatomy, there's a couple of main ones for human anatomy. So there's one by a guy called Richer from 1890 something. If you look that up, that's probably one of my favorite. That's I think it was written in French originally. The name might give it away. But Scott Eaton teaches with that book a little bit in his early courses. So that's where I picked that up from. So that will get you most of your bones and muscle structure. And then there's Anatomy for Artists for Animals. That's a great one. As long as the book is teaching you about insertion and origin. So where does the muscle start? Where does it end? And what is it dependent on? What other muscles overlap? That's generally the kind of stuff that I would recommend. I don't like books that just teach me what a muscle looks like. I think if you can if you can learn how a muscle works, so say an arm, for example, it's dependent on the shoulder blade, the humerus, then the bottom end of the arm is complex as well. And all of those muscles, back and front, they've all got different connection points. Once you've learned them and you learn what they do when they flex, then you can predict what they do without having to look at always copying what you see. So I think finding the reference that teaches you that is the thing that makes the difference. And once you get to a point where you understand that and you can redraw an arm without having to go to that reference, obviously do go to reference, but if you can understand the complex forms underneath that, then that is going to be much more beneficial than being able to just draw what you see. Now, I do gesture drawing, which is great. So lines of action that you'll hear about in a lot of teachers. So I talk about gesture and lines of action when I'm teaching it, but that's much more for animation to some degree. I like to know why a muscle is doing what it's doing and what the bone underneath is doing, and what the weight of the fat of, say, for example, underneath this Machyroceratops on screen, why it would have the weight hanging down, and what's happened with the muscles and then the fat and then the skin to make that happen. Now, you could have learned that on a pig. You could have learned that you could have learned it on a human. You could have learned it on a dog. It really does. Once you get mammalian anatomy down, you can branch out to this, which is obviously this is dinosaurs. It's not even reptilian. So reptilian's a little bit different, but this is much more like a cow or a hippopotamus. But if you know the underlying bone structure and you know what the muscles are doing with that bone structure, that's going to get you much further than being able just to copy what you see on screen. So here's a thing that I talk about a lot. So I run a couple of groups, and we do daily challenges, and I've done for years and years. So if I struggle with something, I draw it every day. So if I'm working out muscles, if I'm working out bones of a dinosaur because I'm on a project, you'll see that reflected in my daily sketches and my daily paintings. And I think one of the big learnings I hope you would take from me is this, and I can't remember who taught me this originally, but it really helped me. I think it was Ryan Kingsley. Practice makes perfect is not the right way to say it. So if you just practice every day, it doesn't mean that you're going to get there. And 10,000 hours is pointless, which is another, people talk about doing the 10,000 hours to get to be a skilled artist or practitioner. It doesn't really get you there if you're practicing the wrong thing. So the big thing that always sticks in my mind is perfect practice makes perfect. So if you're just drawing a dinosaur's head because you're good at it, you're going to struggle. If you're just drawing bodies and you're doing it over and over again because you've got there, you'll stagnate. If you can't do hands, do hands. If you're struggling to do, really, really heavy perspective shots, then do a lot of them, but push it to the point where you're uncomfortable. And drawing every day can actually damage you if you're not pushing. If you're just letting it stagnate, and DaCosta will tell you this because he draws every day of his life. And if you just get stuck in that rut, whether it be sculpting or drawing or concepting, you'll get very stagnant very, very quickly. And that's one of the things that led me to an iPad, really, is because I wanted to prove that I could do things that other people were doing on a PC, easily. But I just wanted to push what I could do in a different program. So what you're seeing on screen now is actually, I know we're here with Xencelabs today, but that's all done on an iPad. So the texture, the whole entire thing is done on an iPad. And that means that I push myself to go, right, yeah, I can build a any type of dinosaur if I've got the reference, but I now know I can do it in different ways, different tools. And that means that when you come onto different shows or different software, you're not feeling uncomfortable all the time, because you're pushing it all the time, whether you're sketching it, drawing it, or getting it ready like this. Back to ZBrush. I generally do come back to ZBrush for my production work, and that ability to use those specialist tools. So on this one, for example, it's a good one on screen. This is all done with the cloth tool in ZBrush. So I think the head might even have been made on an iPad. I can't remember, but I needed skin that folded like cloth. And that's when I go and find the tool. I don't learn the tool and then find something to do with it. I just have a need, and then I make the tool do what I want. And that's where programs like Blender are amazing, because there's an army of people making those tools that we want. You know, ZBrush is my main program, but I understand how powerful the other programs like Blender are in the marketplace. So I think Blender now is my main low polygon modeler. So my main box modeling solution is now Blender, which I would not have said that before 2.8. If those of you know it, it just became an incredible tool. But I still go back to ZBrush. This is all done in ZBrush. This kind of sculpting, when you're doing the surfacing, the final surface details, and that might be going off to be used in displacement maps, or it might be going off to be used in normal maps, or whatever. Then it comes out of this kind of workflow.
So Glenn, I think that there are a couple of questions that come in. Some of them are a little similar. Some people might have missed it. So effectively, just kind of just summarizing some of the things we touched on, or you touched on, is understanding the anatomy. What's below the surface, and understanding how that works, and the rules and regulations of the basic structure will inform as you develop. So you go from skeletal structure to the muscular structure and the tendons, and then you build out from the fat and the skin on top of that, and all of that informs the entire sculpt to make sure that you're really understanding all the bits. So if you're drawing something that has a whole bunch of Lego in its belly, that will inform what happens on the outside.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you have to understand, when you're learning this kind of stuff, you've got to understand where bone is poking through and giving you flat planes. You've got to understand where fat has built up, surface fat on a face. Everybody learns the head by doing the skull and then putting muscles on. Well, that isn't how it works in real life. What we've obviously got is the skeleton. We've got then, muscles with tendons and ligaments, which are two different things. And then you've got fat layers, and then you've got skin. And all of that is affected by light, age, weight, and all of those things. So what we generally do is certainly if you're learning off someone who hasn't got a full rounded, sense of all that, then you can just learn the bits and you get samey stuff all the time. And that's what I see too much in students that are coming through, is they do a superhero that's got a defined set of abs. And I haven't seen that many people other than weightlifters who have defined abs. It's much more about the weight of the belly weight, and most humans would have more weight on their arms than actual muscle structure, because it's learning those different things to be able to then put that into your work. And I think, and I'm not the best, creature anatomy is taking me some battles, and I'm still nowhere near the level I want to be. I don't do it enough to be. That's just my job. I get by and I make a living at it, but I want to be so much better, and I could critique my own work, let alone what people who teach me, how they critique me. I'm an active student, so I still go out and learn every year. I'm still at uni. I'm 54 years old and I'm doing an MA, so I'm all about the learning. You cannot stop your learning ever. And I think that's something that that's one of the things I like schoolism for, because it's cheap education with the best people, and that's not
cheap, but invaluable.
Yeah. I'm not an advert at all for schoolism. I'm not in any way affiliated. I just like the people who teach at that company, and I personally have had my money's worth 10 times over. So it's just a fantastic way of getting that kind of learning. Because if you look at Terrell Whitlock I was talking about, I looked at going to America for, doing possibly learning with her. And it was in the region of about 70 to 80,000 to go through the school system, which, one, I'm an adult with a company. Two, I don't have 70 or 80 grand to throw on something that's not going to yield that money back. I couldn't stop the boat and go and relearn it. So I had to find other ways to learn that stuff. And I think you'll find, you included, DaCosta, I know a lot of us are self-trained, or we're self-taught. We had to learn what we had to learn to get here. So the education system is great, but to get to the level you want, you might not find the course that you want, and that can be.
If I could start with what resources are available now, I would be in a different space.
But it's a different battle, I think, for people. Some people watching and listening to me now, well, they're having a different battle than the likes of you and I had, which is where there is too much information now. And what that leads to is choice paralysis is a bad thing. I see that a lot, which is I'm going to learn Blender this week. I'm going to learn ZBrush next week. I'm going to learn, or look at Unreal. It's now you don't need UVs anymore. Or lots of these questions and comments come out and these thoughts go through your head. And it's very hard for people to refine down what do I actually need to do to become a jobbing artist in this world. And you can go online and you can find every single thing you need online. But that's the hard battle, is which bit do how do I learn ZBrush? That's one of the questions I get every single week, which is I can't get past the interface, or I can't get past the way this works. And if somebody doesn't take you past that point, go in and find in a YouTube video. There's very few people who are good at teaching that, and following a linear path of learning. So that I find that quite frustrating for people today. So
for sure. I've got a question about the rigging. Did you rig those dynos, or are you just pushing them into place with transpose tools?
These, I think most of the Triceratops is rigged, but that wasn't shown there. That was only done with transpose. I do use the posing in Blender a lot now, because there's a little pose tool in the sculpting tools in there. But I generally, when I'm working on a sculpt, I need it posed. So I generally want it in. Let me show you, because I was just going to go back onto this. So that's how I sculpt.
That was a question from Christopher Murphy, and I think it was a couple other times.
Hey, Chris. I know Chris, obviously. How are you doing? So that would be, let me just turn this. So we're in ZBrush now. So if we just turn off, this has got ambient occlusion on now, so you can see it better. Turned it off, I mean. So see that level there. So this is a really good thing. So this is retopologize with a single click, which is, I put Z-Remesher up here on my interface. If anybody does want this, by the way, I'll share this interface on my social media, because it's the one I've used for such a long time. But what I would do is I would always sculpt T-pose like this. But during the T-pose, during in the initial stages, what I'll do is I'll always be retopologizing. So what you'll see is I might retopologize something 6 or 7 times, because a lot of people use something called Dynamesh all the time, and they just keep averaging out the mesh. And that's great. That's what I do. But then quite often I want to see how the loops would fall, and how when I do the final retopology, how the muscles would start to form around that topology. So this here is just a single click retopology. But the reason I like that is because then I can just, if you just go to masking, again, and this is why I said to you, DeCosta, about the questions, because questions are actually leading to what I was going to say anyway. So with the transpose tool, for anyone that doesn't know, you can, because I've got a low poly mesh there, I can then basically just use the transpose tool, which is this thing here, this line. And if you have symmetry off, you can just pose it. See how the back end's bending and deforming? You can move that line around. You can tap and blur that masking, and that's how you compose very, very quickly. Now, I wouldn't carry on sculpting with it posed like that, but what you can do is set what are called layers, and you can literally pose it on a layer and then bring it back and carry on sculpting. And that's one of the things that I love about ZBrush is that how dynamic this system is, because it's very you always hear me talking about expense, and it doesn't mean money all the time. It's expensive time and expensive, on a project. Excuse me. Let's get a little drink. On a project.
Transition while you're doing it. We transition to this while you're taking a sip. Transition into how you're using your layers.
Yeah, I'll go back to that. Just let me show you this. So if I'm doing this and posing this, I don't know how this, whether this muscle here underneath is going to stretch correctly. So I would want to know, I'd want to mask it off like this, and then I'd want to understand if every single point that I move will give me a different result. So have I got it right at the sculpting stage? So doing it like this is really, really helpful. Because I haven't spent the time or the money on a rig, and that's what Chris is saying is, do you rig them? Well, at the end I will rig them, but most of my work, 95% of my work, I don't get involved in the rig. I personally don't rig anymore. But then I don't generally need to, because the work that we sell, it's usually part of a team or a pipeline, or I hire a rigger to, and I don't want to waste a lot of time unless it's one specific character or creature on the rigging, because it is super, super expensive. And something I just showed you then is, if you when you're masking like this, if you've got good topology, which a quick Z-remesh will give you that kind of topology, if you pull the transpose line around, it follows your topology. And this is superb for doing basic posing, because it's just giving you the ability to move those limbs around. While it costs 5 or 10 seconds just to quickly do that. But I can test the back of this tricep here. I can test does this deform properly? Where's the ideal pivot? Obviously that's crushing that muscle at the top. So I might want to mask that bit off a bit more. And I might want to mask it the other way, like this, and then try it. So that is where ZBrush excels for me. And that's not just creatures. That's anything organic, really. So my does that answer that question, Chris? I guess it's covered it.
No, I think it answers the question.
Yeah,
nicely.
So let me, on my little note list, I'm always conscious that 45 minutes is no time at all. So in historically, going back when I started with using ZBrush commercially, or certainly from 2006-ish, when Z-spheres came along, I would block something like this out with primitives before that. Then I went to Z-spheres. So I'll just quickly show you what they are. And I think a lot of you will know what these are if you know ZBrush at all. So Z-sphere is just a way to do an armature. And what I do a lot, and I did a video on YouTube about this the other day, or just before my holiday, and I actually use this sometimes just to work out scales. And I'll show you what I mean now. So with Z-spheres, if this is the back of that creature that we've just done, and this here would be, you're coming down from the thigh. This would be your hip assembly here. This technically is your knee. Then this here on us would be here. So that would be the back of our heel, so the calcaneus. But on an animal that's not like us, which is plantigrade, which I said earlier, if they're up on their digits, that you're seeing there is pretty much every dog, cow, every quadruped really, with some exceptions, on their back leg. Mm-hmm. Now, the great thing about ZBrush is that you're working all this out in your Z-spheres. So you can get a feel for what this does. Once you know what you're looking for, once you're saying to yourself, right, I know it's this kind of back leg, I've got to understand where the toes are. I've got to understand that the foot starts here and then down, and then it flattens onto the floor. And an elephant is different than a pig, and a pig is different to a cow. You've got to learn the complexities of that. But this muscle structure, this bone structure is mammalian. And that's what I'm saying. If you've learned a human leg and you understand why you've got, what your hamstring does, what your calf does, what those muscles are doing, it's no great stretch. Just, you're basically changing it like this. And that suddenly made that dinosaur a human. And that's where Z-spheres are great for me. And they're still great because I can explore like this. And with the click of a button, I can turn that to geometry. And then I can do my sculpting. So I call this a digital armature because I'm not looking to do anything that looks like the finished product. What I'm using it for is to lay out all of, how long is a femur compared to, tibia and fibula on a human. Do you know those numbers? Well, go and learn them. Once you know them, then you're ahead of the game. And then if you want to start thinking about, right, my job today is to now do an antelope, you've got to say, right, it's the same bones, it's a mammal, it's got roughly the same bones in it, but there's much, there's a huge amount of difference. So this calcaneus is much higher up. So knowing what it is in the first place is helpful. Knowing the muscle structure of why it is helpful. And if somebody then comes to you and says, right, we need a kangaroo, yeah, it's not a mammal, it's a marsupial. It's understanding all of this kind of natural history. But you can say, right, Why does it walk the way it does? What does it do? You know, I've already got this base knowledge. I've got my core anatomy down. Right, now I'll specialize in a kangaroo for a week, and I'll go and have a look at what the physics of a kangaroo's leg is, and why I would. When we have to do this all the time, I have to go, and if somebody says to you, do a pterodactyl, you got to understand what it is, why it is, why is the wing different on a pterodactyl than it is on an extant animal, which, you know, extinct is gone, extant is us. It's things that are left, they're extant. So is a bat the same as a pterodactyl? Well, no, they're two lines of lineage completely separate. And flight's evolved 5 times. So if you know that you've got insects, you've got the pterosaurs, you've got birds, you've got the 5 core that you've got to understand. Once you want to specialize, then you might say, right, I'm only ever going to make birds. I'm going to really focus on my birds. And you can get jobs doing that. You can go on shows where you're brought in because you're really good at doing dinosaurs, for example. So a good friend of mine, Julian Johnson, Mortimer, if you have a look at what he does, we worked on, I think it was Dungeons and Dragons 2 a long time ago. He just makes dinosaurs all day long, and he's worked for Attenborough's team and people like that. But you look at the quality of the creatures that he's animating, and they're world class because he's focused on just doing large dinosaurs. And I think that I love to see people who specialize to the point where they know a subject inside out like that. That's one of the things that really impresses me with dedicated artists like that. And a good thing with Z-spheres is you can get a lot of the scaling done and dusted before you even. So I've actually used Z-spheres to create something and never gone beyond Z-spheres. So the thing I was saying a minute ago about a dragon that I did for a YouTube video is I talked about why I failed, and what I'd done is I'd done it all in Z-spheres very quickly just to work out how I wanted it to work and move. But then I hadn't done enough work, and then I went ahead and I printed that out. Actually, I remember doing it as just a picture, and then I sculpted off that. And I really messed it up. And to this day, it really bakes my noodle because I made such a mess of a creature because I hadn't done the scaling correctly. I literally failed at the very first hurdle. And I think, ZBrush is one of those tools that, you can use it, but you can actually get it wrong, but, the same as any other software, really. So, what I generally do from this kind of point, I've gone off symmetry there just to show you it's great for learning how to pose a creature like this. So if I just rotate that around, I might stop. I wouldn't go and sculpt when I'm at this level. So as I've said already, I wouldn't go and pose it and then carry on sculpting unless I'm doing a sculptural piece. And unless I'm doing a job where I just need to sculpt everything artistically without being in a symmetrical way. The big problem with symmetry is that it's unnatural. So there is a point where you have to say, I'm going to break the symmetry. What I would do with this kind of creature is I'd convert that to geometry, and then I'd switch it to something like this kind of level here. Let me just show you. So if I've got one. Yeah, like this, and this is that exact model that Machairoceratops, where I'm just going from Z-spheres to core anatomy, and at this point it looks garbage. But what I'm actually doing is the equivalent of adding clay, and this is where I will use Dynamesh. So what I'll do is, if you look at it underneath, that's quite high. It's 3.7 million. But and Dynamesh is here, and I'll just show you what it does. So I'll call it once. And I'll bring the level quite low. And then if you just do control and strike up on the screen, it's remeshing all the time now. So what that means is, see this mesh underneath? If I bring Dynamesh right down to next to nothing and Dynamesh again, it basically lowers the poly count down enough for me to then do my next pass of sculpting. Now, if I kept doing that, it looks blobby, it looks wrong. It's not working for me there at all. I'll dynamesh it again, super low, and you can see I've gone too low deliberately there. But what that level of dynamesh might give me is the ability just to block it out a bit better. Now, as it happens, that is too low. So I've gone a little bit too low. So like something like that, that would now allow me to use these tools here at the bottom. And you only really need these tools in ZBrush. Everything beyond this is just noise. If you've nailed down standard, clay brush, move topological, you don't even really need polish. You use the flatten. Damp standard is crucial because that's this one. I think most people who know what ZBrush is knows about damp standard. That's made by Damien, and it's basically a scoring brush. It's where you do your scored lines like so. But if you can master this bit, just the building up, removing, flattening, a little bit of inflate is always good. Because say, for example, this leg's lost volume here. So you have a low intensity and you're just building up that volume like that. And then dynamesh. I'll put the wireframe on and show you again. So I'm building up volume, knowing what muscle and what bone and what that's all doing. And then dynamesh, and it's just giving me it, it's looking better straight away. Or you could do the other way, which is I could go back to flatten and I just sort of like start getting my planes right and then dynamesh, and that builds that back in. So any of those ways are the ways that I work from that Z-sphere. So once I've gone past, obviously that's a gazelle. We ended up not building a triceratops or a Machairoceratops, but you go from that stage to that stage. And that's where your hard work is. So all of the hard work comes in this, what's called primary forms. So what I'm looking for now is length of the leg, volume of the leg, volume of the tail. Don't even worry about things like this blobbiness here, because I would fix that with sculpting like this, or I would fix it with the flatten tool. And all I'm doing is working around going, is the length of the leg correct? Is the one of everything that I need on the model? So, it's got the horns in, even though they're not right and they're not finished, at least they're there. It's got, 2 forelimbs, 2 rear limbs and a tail. And it's got, I'm not going to start adding on, wings or anything. So now I can start thinking about, right, I can go to the next level now. And eventually that would lead on to what we call you going on to your secondary forms. And that's when I would go maybe upper level, so maybe a little bit higher, and then I might throw in this, which is a Z remesh. I'll just do a quick one to show you. And I think I mesh this. You can see it working there. I'm pointing to it like you can see me. So up here,
well, we can see your cursor.
Yeah, you can see the cursor. So that's given me a rudimentary Z remesh, and it isn't right because look, it's not giving me the loops around this muscle structure here around the thigh. It's not giving me, the tail is not too bad. It's giving me a good, loops around the neck. So that, if you now Control D and you just take that up a notch or two, if you sculpt on that now, you find that that's a much nicer sculpting experience. And you could do a pass with it now, from here, you could easily do an entire pass. Build up the muscles, decide on where the shoulder blade is, decide on, are the ribs showing through the, the big core muscles of the thigh, understanding, how these are working. And because it's going on top of a nice retopped model, well, not retopped, but Z remeshed, it's actually it looks better as you're building it up and it looks cleaner. And you'll get to the point where you do have to, dynamesh again, or something will go wrong and you might have to do that process again. But having it up here is just a couple of clicks, and it means that you're adding the right volume and you're looking for it to get better underneath. And eventually, again, you would be looking at a lot of reference for this sort of thing. I mean, this is still a very rudimentary shape, but you will eventually, you'll get to the point where you get to this level. And this is basically the same thing. And this is what I was talking to you about, doing a bit of a pose test. So what I do at this point is, and a lot of you 2D artists will do this, is I go black on the color, and then I just spin it around and I do a silhouette read. And what I say to myself is, now, would like a 4-year-old know that was a Triceratops from that silhouette? And that's what you're looking like. Does it look good from the top? Well, yeah, it does. If I was to now screen print that and draw through that, I would say, well, that tail's not right. So that was obviously, that would be something where we'd say like this. But that only really highlighted once I got it into silhouette. You can see that wasn't that's what I was talking about with the line of action. There was no follow through, because obviously a spine can't bend in odd ways like that. It just doesn't work that way unless it's broken. So now the silhouette has really highlighted that's the way to do it. Now I might go back and just go back to the T-pose one, because as I say, I don't work with it posed that often. But if along the way you want to stop and you want to experiment a little bit and just say pull one leg forward and maybe just start thinking about what the poses are going to do, I like to see stuff like this, because it takes away the worry of the surface. You're not thinking about surface detail. You're not worrying about anything other than the core basic shape. And I think whether you're doing humans or whatever you're doing, a good silhouette read is what we do in 2D, isn't it? We do, quite often we would try and sort of like block out a black silhouette to get it reading right as a thumbnail. And it's that easy to do it in ZBrush as well. This one's got good musculature and an okay Z remesh before we've ever really got anywhere. If you subdivide that now, Control D, you've got really good solid muscle structure already at that point. It's wrong here and it's not crushing into the body correctly here, but that's because I've posed it and messed around with it. But it's all good learning, and it's all it's all good to explore as you get to the later stages. And the next one would be something like that, where I start thinking about, right, I've got those core muscles down now. It's very blobby still. It's still looking like it's still looking like, you could 3D print it and it wouldn't be bad, but it wouldn't be anywhere near that final. You're starting to see things like this, this is the back of the thigh here. And you've got muscles underneath with fat over the top, but he's got pressure coming down on this leg, and this muscle here, this is on us. This is our calf muscle, the gastrocnemius, I think it's called, going down to that. Remember our calcaneus that I was talking about? And I'm saying a lot of words here, but once you learn them, you don't forget them. And then that is under pressure. It's under constant weight because of the weight of the body pushing down. So that would bulge a little bit or flex a little bit, but then that bit's wrong because it hasn't come down over the top. So maybe at that point you might want to throw in a little bit of an inflate, and you might want to close that down a bit like that. But that inside, if I just go to damn standard, you'll see, I know that inside that the bones there, the kneecaps there, and I know that this, sorry, can't do it sideways. This bit here comes, my tablet slipped off the table, that's why. You got one bone there and one bone there. And this muscle here is basically strapping from there into in here. So it sinks 50% inside the body. And if you didn't know that and you were just looking at pictures, you might just think it ends up here, and it doesn't work like that. And that's where your knowledge of insertions and origins really gets you by. So you could then predict what this leg would do if it came up at the front and it stretched out here and it really put this calf muscle on under a lot of stress.
Nice, Glenn. That's a ridiculous amount of awesome information. We are at time. And
any last questions?
There's 1,000 questions that I could not get to because you are a fountain of knowledge. But people, you can harass. Check the notes below. You can certainly connect with Glenn. He's got a bunch of courses out that are definite things you need to take if you're interested in sculpting and getting into this anatomical. I'm sure you can find some anatomical references or stuff that Glenn's suggested readings. But thank you very much, Glenn. We have to sign off now. But thanks very much for taking the time. It's been ridiculously amazing to watch.
I'll be around on social media all day today. So if there's a specific question that somebody's got, pretty much on any social media, it's at Southern GFX, and I'll try and get to it later on. You still there, buddy?
Yeah, of course. I've got an emergency response vehicle.
Oh, right. Yeah, I can hear it in the background. I thought you muted. Yeah. So if anybody needs me to, if there's a specific question, I'll try and get on. And it's pretty much on any social media at Southern GFX.
No, that's been super fantastic. Thank you very much
No worries.
for sharing all this information with us. And everybody check out the chat. There's a 10% code for discount on Xencelabs kit. And anytime you need any information, just reach out to us. We have a great help department, and there's plenty of stuff on our website to show.
Cool. Well, you enjoy the rest of the day. There's tons going.
All right. Thanks very much, everybody. Great to have you here. Bye-bye.